Inside Moebius 3, this was published in 2018 by Dark Horse. This contains parts 5 and 6 of Inside Moebius as it was printed in French. Parts 1 and 2 are Inside Moebius 1, and parts 3 and 4 are Inside Moebius 2. I picked this up recently in New York. I'm just a big fan of Moebius's work, and I said it before, he's one of those artists that for me, you're going to have to realize that a lot of his stories aren't going to make sense, and they may not be that linear, especially since when he's writing them. But just for the art and for the imagery and the imagination, I think they're worth picking up and looking at. So this book is really well made. It's nice quality. I wish they would reprint some of his earlier stuff, but subsequent to this, we've had the printing of the Major and other books, and I just don't think we're going to get that from Dark Horse. We're just going to get the newer stuff. But I still think it's worthwhile if you're a fan to pick this up. I mean, to me, Moebius is like a Mount Rushmore of cartoonist kind of guy. And I have my own ideas of who's on that Mount Rushmore. I'm not going to cite that debate, but Moebius is definitely one of them when it comes to comics. So there's a lot of imagery here of him flying, and basically this takes place on a world called Desert B, like the letter B, where Desert B is almost like inside his own headspace, a place where he can go for refuge, to kind of go in himself, to get away from himself. And it's strange because it deals with him, and he's talking to his younger selves, he's talking to his characters. I mean, sometimes he puts his characters through some weird situations, and he's saying, oh, what kind of person are you to put your own creations through this? It's odd. And if you've read Dr. Moebius and Mr. Gurr, it's consistent, because Moebius was an odd guy. When he would talk about his art, he was like really focused and really interesting, really exacting. But when he was about everything else, he was all over the place. It's kind of an interesting juxtaposition. But like for instance here, this is Moebius when he's creating this in the aughts. This is 1980s Moebius, this is early 1960s Moebius, and this is Moebius as a child. They'll appear in different areas of this story. So, like I said, most of this takes place in this desert being and this desert landscape. Like, this is Moebius in that time, his current form, and then this is young Moebius who's smoking weed or smoking cigarettes, depends, and he'll have conversations with himself. It's all very odd, and I'm not going to tell you that I understand this. There are certain scenes and certain vignettes that are pretty interesting that actually make a point, but this is not like a narrative. Like, for instance, here's Moebius. He's outside in Desert B, and these are some of his most famous characters. There's Blueberry. There's younger Moebius. There's the Major. There's Arzak. And they're kind of like sometimes saying, well, what's our plot? What are we doing here? And so they're almost like characters in search of a play. And one thing I will say is that in the Major, you see a lot of times they go back to Desert B, and it's done in pen, so it's black and white, and it's set in the desert, but it's really with this color work that the desert really, it gives it life, because you have the blue skies, and then you have the sand and the rocks. It just makes it come alive, and that's one thing I like about this book. It's all color. I think his work, I think you can appreciate the level of work when it's black and white, but I think it really sings when it's in color. Again, he's in this square building in Desert B, and sometimes this building changes shape. Sometimes, like here, it's taller and not as wide, and then sometimes it's wider but not as tall. The characters are driving by, and they're looking at this ad that Moebius is putting up for an airtight garage story. Kind of just odd. Here there's an ongoing subplot with Carlos Castaneda's The Art of Dreaming. And scenes where he'll go back and talk to himself in time. Like, for instance, in his Desert B, he goes back in time, I guess it's head, and he ends up talking with his 1963 self, and he's telling his 1963 self, hey, in the future, if you get offered a role in a cartoon called Blueberry, you got to take it. And he's laughing at the name, like Blueberry, that's kind of silly. And he goes, and you got to adopt the name Moebius because everybody's going to know you that way. And he's like, that name is kind of stupid. And so during this, he's getting irritated talking to him, his young self. He's like, man, this guy's a punk. So it's kind of interesting how, like, instead of just being friendly, he's like, I'm trying to talk to this young kid who won't listen. Sequences where they're both in bed in these sparse areas and they're sleeping and they're dreaming, but they're dreaming within this subconscious land. You can see here, this has gotten shorter and wider. Just an interesting trick on the visuals. And as I said, there's a lot of stuff here that it's just hard to understand, and I'm not even gonna try. Like I said, there's some vignettes that I found interesting, but overall, it's just hard for me to do. And I don't know if there's any real resource to figure this out. I will say this interesting is because even still here, like when they're coming to part 6, the character's saying, hey, we're in part 6. We got to do something. Like, what's the finale going to be? So it's, like I said, it's almost these characters in search of an exit. And one thing I did notice about this final part is that you start seeing more saturated colors. Start seeing more vibrant greens, more vibrant blues. I think like the sun is starting to set, the day is starting to shorten. It's almost like a visual allegory to this being the last volume. And because colors change how they look like depending on where the sun is. This is why people love that golden hour light or that sunset light, because some colors just really pop and change depending on the kind of colors that the sun is emanating at that time. I don't want to get too artsy, but like here you notice more yellows and greens, darker blues, the reds here, and it goes on and on and on towards the end. And like now, then he has this conversation with a coyote, and I don't know what the coyote represents or who it represents. I should research it. And then here you have this part of chapter 6 where it says second section. And this is almost like just a gallery of great art. This is just scenes. It all takes place in Desert B. And as you can see, like it's getting darker, how there's the desert has red, and the blue starting to have darker blue and then down to lighter blue, the shades. You see it's darker here. Some of his work is just really interesting, just the imagination to come up with this stuff. You see here, this looks like it's like a dusk. You can tell by these oranges and then coming out, and the shadows, because the shadows are very long now, because the sun is about to set. You start, and like I said, you're having more and more of these dusk scenes, and I'm not even sure what they are, but they look really beautiful. This is that image that I showed earlier of, this is his second wife, Isabel. And just really cool stuff. And then it goes back to him sleeping in his bed and then meeting his younger self. And then the younger self is looking at him. He sees his face, and then all he does is pick up this, like, sculpture of his face, and he just leaves. And that's it. And that's it. So there's, like, no answer to any questions. I did like that every page, there's a lot of references as far as the art or what was meant on a certain page. So I've started reading some of this, and it gives a good insight, because a lot of the jokes here, even though the translation is good, a lot of the jokes here are based on French humor. And you almost need some of this stuff. Some of this stuff is obvious as to why it's funny or the emotional reaction you're trying to get, but some of this, you actually need somebody to explain it to you. And then once you understand it, you're like, oh, I see what it's trying to say. Like the word play, like there's certain word play that works in French, but when it's translated, it doesn't really work in English, like the desert bee. that whole naming, why he called Desert Bee, why when you read what the word desert bee sounds like in French and what it almost sounds like in French, then you can kind of see like the in joke. So this actually helps. This is the problem, the limitation you have with translations. If you're trying to use wordplay and subtle humor, it can be lost in translation, literally. And then books that are available now. So if you are a Moebius fan, this is definitely something that you can pick up. This ran me $30. I think the eBay price for a copy like this is $30 plus shipping. I picked it up because I never really thought about getting these books, but I saw it. You never really see Moebius books, that many books in the wild. And I will say that I think once reading this, I could probably read the major and maybe get more out of it. But again, this is that era after he left Los Angeles, came back to France from about 2000 up until 2010, that he's in his own headspace. He's creating these comics that are in his own subliminal mind, where he's exploring these ideas, and they don't really make a ton of sense in a linear fashion. They make sense to him. It's sort of like, hey, you know what? I'm just going to make comics for me, and whatever comes to mind is literally what I'm going to do. And the major was like that as well. So this is that era. But for me, as I said, I would be happy to get these books because I just really do like looking at the art. Very impressed with how clean and simple it is at this stage of his career, where there's a lot communicated with as little as it needs to be done. So but it's interesting because there's scenes like this that are very simple, but then there's this ongoing theme where he's out in the desert and he's being confronted by thousands and thousands of different versions of himself. And I've looked at these and I've tried to figure out, like, did he just do a stamp and just have the rest draw? Because I can't believe he actually drew all these guys individually. But there's enough done here where there's enough difference, and I guess maybe there's some tricks here, but where they don't all look like the same. It's not like that Seth thing used to do, where he used to get a stamp and then have certain images stamped so that way he could just kind of like fill it in. This actually looks like a lot of this was drawn by hand just to be subtly different. So I'm not sure about that, but I'm looking at this and I'm kind of like amazed. So there's got to be some tricks here. I just don't know enough to know what the tricks are. Things like this are just really impressive. And as I showed a little while ago, this kind of gallery section is also very impressive. So if you're a fan, you should get these kind of books when you see them, if you see them for a good price. If you're not as much of a fan, or if you're looking for a linear story, you're looking for The Long Tomorrow, or you're looking for Blueberry, you're not gonna find it. And that's just my opinion. Anyway, I hope you found this interesting, and if anything, at least enjoyed the art that's in the inside. If anyone has any insights or resources as to articles that maybe could explain some of this, I appreciate it. If not, I just hope you enjoyed seeing the book. Thanks.